Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
Yes, Marcus, it's that time of year. I'm wearing my Christmas hat.
I can see that clearly now.
You can. Of course, you're on YouTube, but our audience can't see it. So tell them exactly how handsome my Christmas hat looks.
It looks very handsome. Like it is red. It goes with your gray beard. You might have to gain a couple of 20 kilos or something or more, and to really pull it off. And I know you're not gonna go there.
No, don't want to do that. I've already put 20 kilos on during pandemic. I don't need to put on 20 more to look like Father Christmas.
Christmas time, you're gonna put at least 5.
Yes, I know.
More.
But I know. I'm very confident that 2022 will be great. But who's on the show?
So today, we've been lucky on this one. So we got Dr. Nate Zinsser on, who wrote a book called The Confident Mind. So he's a coach for confidence with high performance athletes. He's coaching over at West Point, the military academy, which is one of the most outstanding places in the world for military training. And we talked a lot about him about exactly that, confidence. And I think it's a very timely subject matter, as much as it is a super interesting subject matter in general on performance, teams, people dynamics, and so on. However, what were your takeaways?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation with him and doing it from his office at West Point, which is the kind of that military stoic sort of design and extremely bright fluorescent lights in the background. He is indeed a genuinely confident sort of guy, and it came through in the interview, which I thought was really good. My two takeaways. The first one was about affirmations. He talks in the book quite a bit about affirmations. And we were talking in the 1990s, affirmations became the subject of actually a joke. You would kind of tell yourself all these amazing affirmations, and they didn't actually work. He draws a really clear delineation between looking at previous performance and anchoring those with affirmations. I performed really well in this situation. I can do that again. And it's not just a tell yourself you can do it, it's remind yourself that you did it, which I thought was really, really good. The other one was, he says, you really shouldn't focus too much on rational thought and overthinking things. And I'm always kind of pushing very hard that we need more clear critical thinking. We need more rational thought. And he's like, okay, so let me differentiate that. If you're planning something, then I'm probably going to err on the side of rational and clear-headed thinking and logic. But when you're in the performance, when you're doing the concerto, when you're about to make the one kick, when you're about to do the big sales presentation, clear your mind, forget all of those details, be in the zone, be in the moment, and that's where you need to focus. And I thought that was really nicely done, pulling those things together. But those were my two takeaways. What were yours?
Yeah, so I liked that I think it's in the very beginning of the book that he talks about there's a lot of myths about confidence. And one of the things that, I surely in my life at some point believed in was that, once you reach a certain level of confidence, you just go and go and go. And confidence just isn't linear. So the odd thing I find often in organizations and teams is like, well, companies seem to expect you to be from 9 to 5, same performance, which essentially means same confidence, right? But people are way more organic. And he said, people are nature's incomplete beasts. It's like we're all flawed. How can you then squeeze us into this? I mean, yes, we're trying. Everyone tries as hard as we can. And we talked about Eddie Hall lifting 500 kilos in a deadlift. And it's like, yeah, we're trying really, really hard as a species to perform higher and higher and higher and get ourselves into these brain hacks of getting there. But in between those peaks, there's low points. And trust me, I've been, and I'm happy to reveal this here, live, not live, but, so I had my bouts with depression over since COVID and getting back out of that hole. So, my mind that I thought was really trained over more than 20 years of working with it a lot got hit really badly. My confidence got shattered and I had to dig myself way back out. And at a good place now. I'm really happy. But these things are just not consistent. So the question is, why do organizations calculate that the people perform equally constantly? And I think some people also say, high performing teams, they don't last very long. Yes, because we're human beings. And I think it's a very important thing to know from someone who works at the top military academy where life and death situations comes out of these officers. Also, I think he's coaching some of the top NFL like quarterbacks and whatnot. So there's a lot at stake. And if he says, look, that's not what it is, you have to keep confirming it. You have to keep digging back into this library of positive things in order to maintain it and keep it uplifted, and hopefully and have a logic consistency to maintain your emotional quality. That is super important. And that's super valid, and it's great to know that someone who's working with high performing individuals says, look, we're all flawed. You have to trick yourself often into getting into the positive cycle, and you can. Everybody can. So that one thing for me was just striking, and there's a lot of elements in it, as I normally ramble on and put a lot of elements into one thing. You know, destroying that myth of like constant high performing. Once you're there, you're good and you go higher. It's like, no, you can drop anytime. It's a fragile system you're working in, and organizations need to recognize that people might be more fragile than they are. We're post COVID. We're still in the middle of a lot of things. We're now at was it Omicron. It's we're still there. So
Mm.
consider that, know it, and help people to get into these positive cycles because we need them every day. There's no once you're there, you stay there thing. It doesn't exist. I love that a lot.
Well, I agree with you completely, but for now, let's go talk to Nate.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we have Nate Zinsser here. Hello, Nate, and thank you for being on the show with us.
Good afternoon, good day, all. It's great to be here. Thanks for the privilege.
Yeah, well, thanks for dialing in straight from West Point, which is quite a place to sign in from. So we usually start at the top, so please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
My name is Dr. Nate Zinsser. I wrote the book, The Confident Mind, because in my 30 years of doing sport and performance psychology research and advising and training, it has become very clear to me that confidence is the mental skill that allows all the other mental skills to work well, and confidence is what makes human performance at a high level possible. Certainly not a guarantee, but very much possible.
Yeah. And so jumping right in, because confidence, it's a very big subject. It's a very important subject, and I think it's super interesting for not just individuals performing, but generally group dynamics and so on. And in our work, which is a lot in change and transformation of organizations, we're coming across a lot of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is people who have a really high level of confidence, but actually have a really low level of expertise. And the less expertise they seem to have, the more confidence they seem to show. So that gets you, just to challenge you with the first question straight away, into like, how do you differ then when you build confidence, that you build the right confidence? Is there any challenge in that that you can see where the wrong confidence is maybe built, just to start with something like that?
I think you're identifying something very, very important. My work in confidence is helping people recognize, first of all, how competent they indeed are. I don't think there's any such thing as overconfidence, but there is definitely such a thing as false confidence, having a
Mm.
sense of certainty about an ability that in fact you do not have. What I find in my work is that we have a very confident group of young men and women here at West Point training to be Army officers, and they're very competent in many, many ways, but they mentally and emotionally discount their competence. They undervalue their various skills to the point where they question themselves at the moment of truth, taking an exam, playing in an athletic contest, taking a agility or physical fitness test. And as a result of that discrepancy between their true level of competence and their sense of certainty about it, their confidence in it, they underperform. I don't see a lot of people who have an overinflated opinion of themselves to the point where they really believe they have competence that they, in fact, do not have. My experience is more in the opposite direction, but it is quite possible, and we've seen it, you've identified it very clearly, that sometimes people are elevated to a position that they don't really have the competence to inhabit or occupy. And henceforth, you get some significant underperformance when it matters.
Yeah, so it's
You've
really
had to.
interesting because so sorry, just jump in, Troy. But so a it rings a bell a little bit with one of the conundrums that when we had David Mulcahy, the U.S. Navy submarine captain, who said, there's this general hierarchy thing where you go up, and if you haven't gone through a certain threshold, you've never given commands. You just received commands, and suddenly you expect to give commands, and so there's a whole gap in that. So that rings a bell. But the other thing, the other word you mentioned, and that's the question I actually want to ask, is about emotions, right? So I personally feel my emotions are a great driver in my performance and my energy and what I have. And at the same time, they can be my biggest enemy, of course, at the same time. So how do you tend to how do you strike sort of the balance or tell people, which part of their emotions to sort of go for and which parts to avoid, and is there a way to deal with that in a way to bring the competence out in a positive way and not destroy it negatively?
The way I typically try to help people understand the relationship between your thoughts and your emotions and your resulting performance is to look at those emotional states as being typically driven by a habitual set of thoughts about your past and your present and your future. You know, I'm about to take an exam. I'm worried about my score. That tends to produce the emotional state of fear and apprehension, which creates muscular tension, which creates a tunneling of focus, which tends to lead to poorer recall of all the material that one has studied for this test. Um, Conversely, if you can discipline your thought process to work around concepts or thoughts like, I've done enough preparation. Let's see how well I can do here. Here's an opportunity for me to improve my scores, improve my average. Here's an opportunity for me to show what I do indeed know. That tends to produce an emotional state of ease and trust. That tends to relax the musculature. That tends to allow the blood to go to the brain, and that facilitates the recall of studied material. Um, your emotions can, as you say, be either an asset or a liability, but I found that those emotions are very often driven by habitual thought processes. Now, there are times where the emotions jump in first. You know, the amygdala, that little part of the brain, which can be sort of a mean-spirited bully, can sometimes kickstart a process. But everybody's got the ability to be aware when their emotions begin to flare and you can talk yourself down off that edge. You can be your own best friend, your own biggest fan, your own best, most capable, most patient advisor, and you can drop yourself down through your own deliberate conscious control from that emotional edge and find that sweet spot where you're perhaps energized but not over aroused to the point where you start becoming too tight, too tense, and hence ineffective.
So, playing on that a little further, you talk about a number of limiting core beliefs. And one of your limiting beliefs that you pointed out in the book was that always be logical and think carefully about what you're doing. Um, and I have, over the last year, seen a complete absence of rational, logical thought. Every decision seems to be made purely based on what they feel is going to be right. And how do you balance the need for being sensible and being driven and or occasionally manipulated by emotion?
I think a lot of it depends on what the situation uh, is that you're in. If you are planning, designing, building, I think it's best to be driven by logic and
Okay.
grounded in facts. Okay. Once you are at a point of delivering a performance, whether we're talking that penalty kick in a football match, whether we're talking zeroing your weapon on a firing range, whether we're talking about a surgeon getting into the, pardon the expression, meat of a surgical procedure.
Mm,
Once you're there, you have to trust your abilities and maybe be a little less analytical, judgmental, and self critical so that your brain is not preoccupied with all this discursive thought, because that will interfere with your sensory reception of the relevant data, your brain's automatic recall of your vast experience, and your brain's delivery to your hands, your feet, your mouth, the right instructions at the right moment. So there is most definitely a time and a place for conscious, rational analysis before a performance and certainly after as you look back upon it. But once you get into the moment where you are in the spotlight, playing the concerto, making the penalty kick, that is a time to put your conscious, deliberate, analytical mind to rest and allow your trained in experience to express itself. This presumes, gentlemen, that you do have some good trained in experience.
yes.
You can't fake it if you don't have it. You
Yes.
know, you've
Yeah.
got to have the training, you've got to have done the work, but then you have to trust the work. It's very clear in the neuropsychology literature that individuals in a high state of effective concentration really have relatively quiet brains, as opposed to those individuals who are more distracted and are kind of multitasking um, while they're supposed to be attending to one thing and one thing only.
Yeah.
There is high performance is characterized by an economy of brain activity. The brain structures that are important for the performance of the task are fully engaged, and those brain structures that are not involved tend to drop out. And for so many of us, there are brain structures that have nothing to do with executing that surgical procedure, playing that concerto, making that penalty kick. There are lots of brain structures involved that are active that don't help us. All these things about what'll happen if I miss, what are my percentages, how is that goalie going to move, what are the risks here. That stuff has to be tamped down in order for your trained in experience to fully express itself.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great explanation of, what some people would call focus, just being focused and nothing else disturbs you from that. And it goes quite well into, because we had weeks and months ago, someone talked about talent and deliberate practice, and this
Right.
thing that exists outside of when you're actually performing. So you do a performance, then you step out, then you get back to the other part of the brain that looks at it,
Yes.
analyzes it, and really has things sinking into your library of your brain to then maybe add it to the execution when you focus on it. And it's all very fascinating. So I want to ask you then the next question a bit more about performance. So there's a lot of myth around confidence as well, and one of them that you describe in the book is the fact of, oh, once I'm confident, I'm there, and it's all good, and I'm gonna be bang, 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 like just outperforming to the best of my ability for, I don't know, weeks, years, who knows? But so that's one of the myths too. If you reach a certain level, you can keep doing this. We know it's not. So in that sense, I'd like to ask you sort of a two-side question or two-aspect question. So one is that companies tend to seem to expect people to perform within a particular time bracket, 9 to 5, consistently in the same way. They calculate the whole business often around this, which for a lot of people who look at this sounds silly, because they get the gut feeling that can't be right. No one can act like that. And I'd like you to give us your view on that, this kind of constant performance and the myth of linear performance. Maybe on the example of, you said you also in the book, you talk to a lot of ballet dancers who obviously have to perform every time they perform to the highest possible quality level. Is there a similarity, or what's your view on that? Maybe you have some stories there. You say in the book you have some stories, so I'm picking on the
Yeah,
stories there.
you're dead on in that there is a myth that once you achieve a certain level of confidence, you retain it forever. We've all been seduced by the fairy tales and the Walt Disney movies about some magical transformation happening to one, and henceforth you live happily ever after. Uh, no, confidence is indeed very situation specific, and it is indeed very fragile. It all depends on the running total of memories and self-beliefs and fantasies that you currently maintain. And if you're not careful about being selective in what comprises that running total of thoughts, your confidence is going to waver all the time. This is indeed what makes it challenging. I don't want to scare anybody off by that. I'm just trying to be realistic about it. Um, Now, to your point about consistency of performance, um, well, let's get real, gentlemen. Um, we are imperfect human beings inhabiting a imperfect physical world populated by other imperfect human beings, all of whom are prone to error. So there is always going to be fluctuations. There's always going to be variation in our performance levels. You know, even if you're Serena Williams, you're going to have inconsistencies in the speed of your first serve, the number of unforced errors that you commit in a match. There's always going to be variation. Your job is to minimize the variation with the understanding that you're never going to eliminate it. But the idea is to minimize the variation. And the best way to do that is to minimize the variation in the way you think about yourself as you prepare for a competition or performance, and to minimize the variation in how you think during the performance. For the Serena Williamses of the world, that means you have to be very, very consistent in how you think between points. You have to have a very determined, well established response for the point that you win because you hit a winner, for the point that you won because your opponent hit it out of the park, for the point that you lost because you made a mistake, and the point that you lost because your opponent made a mistake. Those are the only four things that happen in the world of tennis, right?
Right.
You have to have a consistent response to all of those so that your mood state stays relatively consistent throughout the match, which allows your physiology to be relatively consistent throughout the match, which allows your execution to be relatively consistent throughout the match. Again, human variation is built into us as a species. And all we can do to minimize that variation is to be ridiculously consistent in our mental approach to a task, our mental approach to a performance. I spend a lot of time in the end of the book looking at the process of being very rational and very clear-headed as you analyze the day's work, the week's match, the quarterly results. What are the highs and lows? And then what are you learning from that? You have to be your own harshest critic in those moments, but you also have to be your best and most honest friend.
So I want to go on that particular tangent a little more, and I want to talk
Please.
about your next first victory, which I think is a really interesting concept. And as a subtopic to that is this whole idea of affirmations and the importance of affirmations in doing that. I mean, back in the 1990s, getting the Wayback Machine, affirmations were huge, and then they became too pop culture, and they almost became like frowned upon to do all these kind of self-talk, self-affirmations.
That's
And you
right.
using
It
them,
became an object of comedy.
it became Stuart Smalley. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough, and by gosh, people like me. That's the kind of thing. So, how do you do next first victory with affirmations brought bang into 2021 to get the results that you get for the people that you coach?
Okay. Well, first we look at what happened. Let's look at the results. Let's look at the process that you went through during said performance, whether it's a presentation you made, whether it's an athletic contest that you participated in, or whether it's the final exam for your systems engineering or nuclear thermodynamics course. What were the results? What was your state of mind during it? Where did you have great focus? Where did you lose focus? Let's look at all the what happened aspects of that. And once we do that exploration, we move then to, okay, what is this telling about ourselves? So what do all these results mean? Well, it learned that I am very comfortable with this process. It learns that I have learned that I am capable of executing this particular task at this particular moment within that overall performance. I take what I have learned, and then as we go forward, now what?
Right.
At that point, you can take, well, I learned that I can move my feet effectively when guarded by this kind of opponent. You can take that statement, that recollection, and turn it into a statement about yourself in the present tense, which is empowering. I move my feet well against any kind of opponent, which is a good statement, a good story to tell oneself about oneself if one is in that particular performance situation. The concert violinist is going to reflect on her performance and realize that, yes, I had trouble in this performance with this particular arpeggio or this particular movement. I was very successful in this other place. So I need to affirm what I did well. I also need to affirm my ability to improve in the area that my recollection reveals was not as good as I wanted it to be. Okay? If I want my fingering to be precise and accurate during a particular part of that violin concerto, well, I better be affirming it. I have to be working on it, but I have to be affirming it to myself as well. My fingering is precise. I breathe emotion into the second movement or the fourth movement or whatever. I got to think about what I want as if I've got it. And what I'm thinking about is based upon what I have learned from my previous performance. How's that for an answer, gents?
Excellent.
So when we talk about confidence and performance, is there something as well with confidence where, as much as you're confirming your back history of saying, I've done this, so I can now go for it again and advance, are there also places in ahead of it where you say, well, actually, those are the kind of things you can play as well in your head to sort of tap into something that there's some energies in you that gives you that extra step for confidence or something. Do you have that too?
You are describing the underlying process through which all human performance breakthroughs occur. What Eddie did with the 500 kilo deadlift is what Roger Bannister did in 1954 on that wet and windy afternoon when he ran a sub 4-minute mile for the first time in human history. You know, he had a sense that it was possible, and boy, did he have to dig down to find it. You know, he describes so beautifully the pain in his chest, the roaring in his ears, and the way his mind went to a place it had never been to before, as he was, suffering through the final 200 or 300 meters of that run. I don't know if it's necessarily a dark place. It can be a bright place. But it sure is different than
It's a bit of a
the
means to an end,
everyday.
isn't it? In
Yeah.
some sense, yeah.
Just the sense that, hey, something just might be possible here. Even though the conventional wisdom says, no, it can't be done. No, human body can't run a mile in under 4 minutes. We just can't absorb enough oxygen into the bloodstream to supply the oxygenated blood to the muscles at that level of intensity for that period of time over that distance. It just can't be done. Well, wrong. It can be done. We have no idea what the ultimate limits of human performance are because people have this wonderful capacity to trust their training and then to invest in an as of yet unaccomplished vision of what's possible. We are going to get a sub 2-hour marathon one of these bright days, fellas. We almost had it. That documentary, 2 hours, where Mr. Canio is paced under perfect environmental conditions, level track, perfect temperature, perfect humidity. I think he came in at 2 hours and 1 or 2 seconds.
I thought actually last year he ran that. Didn't he run that in, where did he run it? Switzerland or something? Because I
I,
remember, so I ran my first marathon last year in I'm not going to mention the time I ran that in, but he literally just got, because I know he was sponsored by Red Bull once and tried, he was in 2 hours something. And I think in Switzerland he actually did this. So I think we've done this already. I think quite officially, but yeah. So yeah, I mean, these things get broken every
and and
time, and
and,
once you
and he
go
yeah.
there, suddenly a lot of people go there, and then yet again it gets like the 500 kilos, and then it gets pushed further and further. We're already, I
Mhm.
think, at 505 kilos or something like
Mm.
that. And it's
But he
pretty
said at
crazy.
the conclusion of during his training, is like, I refuse to put limits on myself. I refuse to say this is possible and this is impossible. Now, we're not talking about sprouting wings and flying. We're not talking about leaping tall buildings in a single bound. We're talking about running fast. Who the heck knows how fast we can run? Who the heck knows how much iron a human being can lift off the ground? Let's keep exploring. Those feats do require extraordinary amounts of energy. And to get that energy, perhaps you have to put yourself in that emotional place of desperation. My family is threatened. I need to access all that adrenaline, all those wonderfully naturally occurring performance enhancing chemicals that our brain is capable of producing. If I got to tap myself into an emotional state which releases those performance enhancing chemicals in order to give me a chance to get those 500 kilos off the ground, well, I'm going to think in such a way, I'm going to picture things, I'm going to tell myself things that get my emotions working, and that gets my inherent organic pharmacy producing those chemicals, which give me a chance to run that sub 4 minute mile, to run that sub 2 hour marathon, to lift those 500 kilos, etc., etc., etc.
So,
And getting back, to the question you raised about the ballet dancers who work very hard on a very particular performance, and then they're called upon to train for a different role, which might require a whole different level of artistic expression. This particular role might not be as athletic. It might be more emotionally evocative. Um, they have to start all over again, practice and practice and practice, and literally convince themselves that, yes, I have the I have the strength, I have the stamina, I have the emotive capability to be effective in that particular role. Um, Giselle, Clara, you name it.
right. So, unfortunately, we always have more questions than we have time.
Doesn't it
Um,
always seem like that?
it does always seem like that.
I
The
think
last
time
question
time makes a fool of all of us.
yes.
Sorry, Troy.
Um, Confidence and isolationism. We've
Mm.
had so much isolation with COVID, so much stay at home, so much work at home. How do you find that is impacting the people you're working with, that they don't have human contact as part of their confidence regime?
Yeah, yeah. I can think of so many uh, professional and elite athletes whose practice time with their teammates has been limited due to travel restrictions, due to the fact that maybe some members of the team have actually tested positive for COVID and they have to be quarantined for a period of days and weeks during a time of the calendar year when, boy, the rest of those teammates sure would have liked to have had that fella or that gal in the mix to practice with. Uh, there's no easy solution to that. The best you can do is, for your own peace of mind, get as much technical practice as you can with the people who are available, and get on the phone, get on the Zoom call, get on the Teams call, and talk to the other folks that you can't physically practice with. Let them know what you're thinking about. Let them know how you are expecting their eventual physical together practice to turn out, what you're looking forward to accomplishing when we do get on the same practice pitch together, and basically reassuring one another that, yeah, we're not going to get all the time what we'd ideally like to have, but we're going to get enough. We're going to get enough. We are going to be very, very ready. And between your skills and my skills and the skills of our teammates, we're going to be in a great position to win. Let's get excited about how good we can be, and let's retain that excitement no matter how much isolation or how many sort of these practice setbacks we have to endure.
Yeah, I think
Great.
there's a wonderful words, and I think it translates so nicely to a when you understand that a lot of athletes are not necessarily professional. Look at the Olympics. When we talk to Kath, they have jobs and families on the side. They have X minimum amount, or not minimum, but actually small amount than you think, to squeeze all that practice in, where they do this on top of it. They have other things to do, and then there's COVID and all these things happening. And it also translates to organizations where, and I've been listening to think General McChrystal had someone on from Pfizer, and they realized, which was an odd realization, that people don't just have their job to have the family. There's a lot of stuff going on in people's lives, and saying that if that context that we're living in now diminishes your confidence, just talk to people, do that. And I'm sure so me and Troy took that to run a podcast, and it helped amazingly my sanity, at least, to talk to people around the
Absolutely.
world about what's going on, how they're feeling, and just knowing you have a bit of a grasp of not just yourself and that you're not alone, but there's other people, similar worries, similar thoughts, is amazing, and it helps your confidence. It helps a lot of things, and I think it's something to go forward with, because I think our times are not getting any less complex. That's for sure.
That's
And
for sure.
so, with those words, thank you, Nate, for your time, your insights, your answers. This was absolutely lovely. Truly a highlight. Great talking to you, and so thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the privilege of participating with you. I wish all the best to your listeners, and maybe we'll see you over on this side of the pond sometime. And I hope you all cultivate and retain and then apply a very confident mind. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section, and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.